Hey, yeah, let's get started here. Well, first of all, welcome everyone to episode 1 of CX behind the scenes, or customer experience behind the scenes. We put an acronym to this called CXBS, but there's no BS to be had here.
That's right.
This is behind the scenes. Why behind the scenes? Well, here's my observation. There's a lot of stuff going on CX wise, and that never hits the nightly news. You can probably appreciate that. It's just, it happens, but we don't know about it. And, there's a lot of names in the world of customer experience, and, I'm sure they're all doing good things here, but we're looking for what's happening behind the scenes here. So we're aiming to bring those ideas and thoughts and techniques to the forefront here with this idea. We're going to do this on a monthly basis. This is the first one. I'll have more to say about the next episode coming up here and later in this Zoomcast. I'm Karl Sharicz, and I'm here in the lovely city of Newburyport, Massachusetts. They call it a city. I like to think of it as a town because it's not city-like. It's very town-like here, but it's officially a city, where it is 34 degrees, and that is first day above freezing here for about 5 days in a row here. I would encourage everyone here on the Zoom call today to please paste your LinkedIn profile in the chat, because we probably won't have enough time here to go around to have everybody introduce themselves. But that's a good way to do that. And when you do that, when you put your LinkedIn profile in the chat, know that you can always save that chat at the end of the episode here by going to the bottom right corner of the chat, and where you see those 3 little ellipses that says more. If you click on that, and it'll give you a little opportunity to save chat. That means when the Zoom call ends, you'll have all those LinkedIn profiles there in your chat, so you won't miss anything here. Okay, so let me just tell you a little bit more about me. I call myself ex-corporate. I left the corporate world in 2014 after spending many years, I won't say how many, but many years, the last 10 of which were in the world of customer experience. So I learned all this over 10 years of OJT, on the job training. I never had anything that I could rely on as a training or course. I attended webinars. I did whatever I could, learn from whoever I could. But then in 2011, something called the Customer Experience Professionals Association came into existence, and I jumped into that deep end of that pool and did lots of things with the CXPA, including committees, board of directors, MC of events, started the local network in the Boston area where I'm from, and the rest is kind of history. I'm still there, but kind of cut back a little bit here on my activities because I run a company called HorizonCX. And HorizonCX is a consultancy. We're based here in Newburyport, Massachusetts. Started that in 2014. And my focus is primarily on the fundamental elements of CX, meaning that get the basics right. I'm a musician, and I took drum lessons some years ago. And when I took my first drum lesson, I thought I was going to walk in and sit down to a drum kit and start drumming away. And my instructor said, no, all you need is a pair of sticks and something to beat on, because it's all about fundamentals. And so for the first year, it was all about fundamentals. So that's the only way you get good at something, is understanding and mastering the fundamentals. So that's what we do. We help individuals and organizations get good at that by way of training and certification. So that's what we do. We're also, HorizonCX is a partner with QuestionPro. And we serve their clients' needs as well by offering them the same kinds of training we do for everybody else. So that's my story here. John, would you want to say a few words about QuestionPro before we get started?
Yeah, I'd love to. This is my first stab at doing the full company-wide intro. I normally am on the customer experience side of things, so I'm pretty used to pitching that and talking about it. But let me share with what I've got here. I say QuestionPro is a global provider of online survey and research services with more than 15 years in the market. From basic surveys to complex enterprise level research, customer experience, and employee engagement solutions, QuestionPro helps companies make better decisions through data. And if you have any questions about QuestionPro, we have lots of folks on here from QuestionPro, but we also are happy to help solve and answer any of your questions that you might have. For CX related, feel free to reach out to me. I just put my link in the message there, and I can get you routed to anybody else that you might be interested in.
Well, thank you for that, John. And let's get started here. So the way we're going to run this thing here is I've got a special guest here, who I'll introduce in a second here, but this is intended to be a conversation. We didn't call this a webinar specifically because webinars tend to be one way, somebody speaking and the rest of you are all listening. So I encourage you to jump in wherever possible, whenever you have a thought or an idea or a question to ask either myself or Alec. So with that, let me introduce to you our first guest of the first episode, Mr. Alec Dalton, who I met, I think it's 2015. Was it, Alec, 2015?
Got it right, Karl.
I was guest lecturing at Boston University, and I met this young gentleman here, and the rest is history. We became connected and friends, and we've been talking back and forth. Alec is also on the advisory board for HorizonCX, so very happy about that. He's the managing partner of the Hospitality Leadership Academy. He is an alum of other organizations in the hospitality field, Marriott, Ritz-Carlton, and Disney even. It's probably a lot to be said there from that history. And I'm going to let you talk then. And so for Alec, you have the floor for, I would say, as long as you want, but let's just start there and let you introduce yourself, what you're up to, and get right to our topic of today, which is experience design. How do we design experiences to be more successful in the world of customer experience? Because it is all about design. Because if it wasn't designed, then it happened by default, and you don't want to rely on that. All right, so Alec, I'll hand it over to you.
Well, Karl, thank you for that very kind introduction and for the invitation to join this great event. And I'm so glad that we've got a lot of attendees here who are hopefully looking forward to participating in the conversation as well. And so to all of you, I'd say that at any point, if you'd like to contribute, ask a question, share a comment, feel free to drop it in the chat box or raise your hand, and we'll call on you or read what you have to say in due course. To add a little bit more context to my background, again, my name is Alec Dalton. I'm the managing partner and principal of the Hospitality Leadership Academy and executive director of a company called Accelerating Leaders. And both of these are consultancies that help organizations design and deliver five-star service experiences. Well, we often work with hospitality companies, thinking along the lines of hotels, restaurants, cruise lines, casinos, theme parks, and everything in between. Any organization at the end of the day ought to be delivering some degree of hospitality when it comes to the services that they provide and the engagement that they have with their customers. And so what my firms do is either through executive education, frontline service training, or general management consulting in marketing, HR, or operations, we help organizations think through the practices and policies that can help them be best in class. Like Karl nodded to, I've grown through the ranks with companies like the Ritz-Carlton, with Disney, with Marriott International, and enjoyed kind of working not only on the front lines of service and hotel operations, but also in global roles such as leading global quality technology for Marriott for several years. And it's fun now to be able to work with organizations both in hospitality and beyond and help them, like I said, understand how to apply the principles of hospitality across their businesses. And so I think that's a good segue into today's conversation, which, like Karl said, is all about how do you design services intentionally? You may not have realized it, but you've accidentally walked into a webinar on quality management, which I think is a topic that's critical to customer experience, but that we don't acknowledge often enough. And the best parallel I can make is by offering a quote from Ralf Speth. He was the CEO of Jaguar and a couple of other different car brands over the years. And he said that if you think good design is expensive, you should look at the cost of bad design. I think all of us can appreciate in our own experiences, not only inside the customer experience world, but as customers ourselves of various organizations, that it's really easy to spot when something goes wrong. intentionally or otherwise. And there are costs, whether it be the cost of waste or the cost of refunds or exchanges, but also the cost of reputation and loyalty that come along with poorly designed or unintentionally designed experiences. And so, what I'd like to do today is talk with you a little bit about some theories and techniques that might be relevant to your business, and we're going to have some good discussion along the way. A starting point along these lines is a framework that I love to talk about. It's called the cost of quality. You can imagine that delivering a high quality experience isn't cheap. To deliver experiences on par with those like the Ritz-Carlton and with Disney, for many businesses can seem like it would require astronomical investment. Organizations known for quality are also known for being meticulous, for having a lot of processes, in some cases, for having seemingly too many processes and for being overly bureaucratic. Or it may seem, in some cases, wasteful to be so, uh, how would I phrase it, focused on making sure that all of the customers' wishes and needs are fulfilled. But at the end of the day, these organizations are also laser focused on customer satisfaction and also on making sure that their operations are efficient and lean behind the scenes to the best of their ability. So, how do they think about quality and making investments in quality management? They don't just think about it in terms of quality assurance, but they think about it holistically. There are four categories of quality costs that we consider in this cost of quality framework. Two of them are quality by design, and the others are quality outcome measurements. From a design standpoint, there are preventative costs associated with quality. These costs include things like testing of software to make sure that it's working properly, making sure that if you're in a physical environment, that there are safety practices and protocols in place, that the area is clean and well organized and stocked in an effective manner. You also have appraisal costs. These are the costs associated with making sure that that quality gets maintained, things like auditing and mystery shopping, having checklists, and training on an ongoing basis. Those require investments, but the byproduct of those is a quality or consistent experience that gets delivered time and time again. And while it does require investment, while it does require time and money to both prevent and appraise quality, doing so offsets the negative costs of quality, the costs of poor quality, if you will. And these are internal and external failure costs. The external failure costs are the most obvious to all of us. These would be things like the cost of issuing a refund, the cost of lost goodwill when an experience doesn't go the way one planned. But there are also internal failure costs. Waste, rework, and employee morale can also take a hit when quality doesn't meet the expectations of customers or the organization. And so, as we think about quality, as we talk about service design over the course of this conversation, I want you to keep these four buckets in your mind. Again, being prevention costs, appraisal costs, and internal and external failure costs. Because, again, over the course of this conversation, you're going to see how they kind of create a balancing act so that you can achieve an optimal level of quality in your organization. But before we go any further, and in the spirit of interactivity, I think it's also important that we define what quality even is. And so I'm curious, what do you think quality is? I'd love for you to either write it in the chat box or feel free to come off mute and share your thoughts with the group.
And we encourage you to come online here because this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to make this an interactive session here. So feel free to unmute, and whether you camera or not, but unmute and chime in.
Mm-hmm. And again, the question is simply, how would you define quality? It's one of those words we probably use every day in lots of different ways, but it has some really nuanced definitions that we should consider. And from Lisa in the chat box, she says, when the experience matches the customer's expectation. There's one definition right there. Does anybody have any alternatives to recommend?
Similar,
No
I would.
defects.
Oh, go ahead.
No defects.
No defects. There's one. Thank you, Jerry.
Achieving the desired outcome. I mean, yeah, building what you intend to build.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so matching expectations internally as well as, to Lisa's point, from an outward expectation standpoint.
Hmm.
I have one.
Carl?
Not perfection.
Do you want to tell a little bit more about that?
Well, I mean, a lot of times we always think about striving for perfection, and it causes us to be delayed in delivering something of adequate quality, just is what Lisa said here. When the experience matches the expectation, if it's matching the expectation, do we need to go any further? Because as you say, there's an investment to this thing. Here's the cost of this thing, the cost of quality. That's what I got.
I want to touch on that too. We'll go on a quick tangent here before we go back to the definition of quality. And in the meantime, folks can feel free to add more ideas to the chat. But Carl's absolutely right. And that's why it's important to consider these four different buckets for quality. On one hand, the prevention and appraisal costs, those are the costs for delivering good quality. They require that investment. And when there is not good quality, when there's poor quality, we run into the internal and external failure costs. If you were actually to calculate your costs in your organization along the lines of the cost of good quality and the cost of poor quality, it creates a parabola. And there is an optimal point, not just theoretically, but practically speaking, in which the cost for prevention, for appraisal, for trainings, for preparations, for planning, et cetera, where the cost to make sure you deliver a perfect experience becomes exorbitant. And vice versa, if there's no prevention, if there's no appraisal, the cost of failure is almost guaranteed because there's going to be no consistency, not only with what's produced internally, but with what's matching or not matching customers' expectations. I see Andy has just commented that quality includes consistency, which hits that nail on the head.
Yeah, Alec, I think it's also important to have context. There is no cost of quality that cannot be borne if you're making medicine.
Right. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that, Jerry?
Yeah, because if one pill in 50,000 is ineffective and it is given to someone, then it could harm someone.
Right.
But in experience management, you might be able to do more balancing, like you're describing, because it's more of a human to human transaction, and people have the ability to adjust to each other, and you can amend an experience with someone in a way that you cannot with a deliverable like a pill, or the anesthesia gas doesn't work and you go operate on the patient,
Right.
that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Before this event, Jerry and I were joking on LinkedIn about how service isn't necessarily rocket science, and and there's another example. You need to get a rocket really, really right, just like you would any medicine or anything that has human, life implications. But
it's not rocket science unless you're building rockets.
Bingo, exactly.
And it's exactly so.
So and I'm glad you raised that point, Jerry. It does depend on the context. And so as you think about your own organizations, you need to think about where that kind of cost curve lies. And sometimes those external failure costs can be incredibly high. Sometimes the internal failure costs can be incredibly high. If you're, let's say, working in an environment with heavy machinery and equipment that's manned by people that could get injured, safety costs are associated, risk management costs are associated with quality, certainly. At the same time, there's opportunity in organizations, to Carl's point about not necessarily pursuing perfection, there's an opportunity for companies to kind of create fail-safe plans. So when things do go wrong, are there measures in place to course correct, to recover in situations where service in particular doesn't meet the expectations of customers in the first go? And we'll talk about that later on in the conversation. But for now, let's revisit the definition of quality. We've all had time to percolate on it. And we've got a couple that I would summarize in three categories. On one hand, you have compliance quality. So this has come up a couple of times in people's comments. Compliance quality is all about the degree to which an experience or products or services match the company's own expectations and standards. So I'll give you a really good example of this in the hotel world. Just about every major hotel brand under the sun has a very robust set of brand standards. And one of my favorites comes from W Hotels. It's one of Marriott's brands. And one of the W standards requires the placement of a certain number of neon green apples in a silver dish by the front desk of the hotel and typically in the pool area or by the spa. It conveys a sense of wellness, which is an important pinnacle of the brand. It provides a nice food offering for those interested in some fruit. And it also, because of that neon color, supports the neon imagery and aesthetic of that particular brand. And so if you go into the 100 pages worth of brand standards for W, you would find a couple of different line items actually associated with the presentation of green apples.
So, Alec, I have a question here.
Go for it, Karl.
I've seen them, and I thought they were plastic apples. I never thought to grab one. Are they real?
They're not only real apples, but the polishing is one of the components. It's one of the criteria for compliance, and so it's so fitting that you bring that up, Karl, because from a compliance quality standpoint, we have a checklist in for those hotels that would require, again, the placement, location-wise, the positioning, the type of material used for the bucket or the bowl, specifications on the particular types of apples, the degree to which they're polished, their coloring, etc. All very specific. But Karl, as the customer, didn't actually take an apple because there was a chance that they weren't even real.
Well, I mean, I don't want to go down too deep of a hole here in that topic here, but I'm thinking about that, and I'm thinking, okay, so that's what the intent was by putting those apples in the silver bowl. Did W Hotels ever do anything to measure the effect of that intent to see if did it do what it was designed to do? Because we're talking about design here.
Yeah, I'm going to come back and answer your question in a couple of seconds, Karl. So we'll put a pin in that for now. But Karl pinpointed a really good example here of compliance quality that doesn't actually match a second definition that Lisa brought up about meeting customer expectations. And we call that customer satisfaction or customer satisfaction quality. And so compliance, again, is all about, are the internal expectations met? And customer satisfaction is all about, our external expectations met? And then there's a third form of quality, which I call competitive quality. And this is all about, our industry standards accomplished or achieved. And so if we think in the world of hotels and travel, you might be familiar with AAA or Forbes Travel Guide and the Star and Diamond ratings, or Yelp or TripAdvisor also have consumer-based ratings. But the fundamental principle here is, does the experience delivered by an organization match the baseline, at least, of its competitors in a similar marketplace? At the end of the day, now we've got three definitions of quality. We've got an industrial focus, we've got an internal focus, we've got an external focus. Which one matters most? It's debatable, but I would argue it's the customer one. At the end of the day, the customers are the ones who are providing revenue into the business. They're the reason the business exists in the first place. It's through their eyes that they're perceiving ultimately whether or not the business is on par, not just with the broader industry, but with other experiences that they've had. Oftentimes we did studies internally within the hotel business on why we don't have self-check-in. It's only recently that's emerged as a practice through mobile apps, and a couple of hotel brands are starting to use self-check-in kiosks. But for the longest time, you had to go to the front desk of a hotel and interact with a front desk agent. And yet you could go to a CVS or a Walgreens and self-checkout, or you could go to a kiosk at an airport and check into your flight. So there's those analogous components that come into play. And again, speaking about the compliance quality aspects, customers don't know how many green apples are supposed to be at a W hotel. Most customers would not expect any green apples to be there in the first place. It's just there. And so to circle back on Karl's question, are studies done? Well, studies can be done, and studies I think ought to be done to figure out, is the experience that's being delivered actually adding value to the customer? Is it helping to elevate the equity of the brand? Worthwhile considerations to make so that you can invest appropriately in different parts of the experience. If it turned out that the green apples at W hotels were not adding brand equity, they were not helping customers feel healthier, nobody was eating them, but the hotel was spending tons of money every week replenishing the apple bowl, they might want to reconsider that investment. And that's, again, kind of part of that quality curve. There's another aspect here about just the expense overall of delivering different parts of the experience. And so for the most part, we've been speaking about quality as an outcome. especially from a customer satisfaction standpoint. Quality is the outcome of the experience that's delivered. But quality should also be thought about as an input into designing an experience that has a likelihood of satisfying customers. And that's where competitive quality and compliance quality come into play. In other words, as a company is establishing its brand standards, it should look outwards to other players in its industry, to other companies and organizations that its customers patron, so that it can understand what expectations the customer is coming in with. And it should do its best to mold those brand standards toward meeting customer expectations as often as possible. And so that's how I envision these three components of quality coming together and creating essentially a feedback loop that allows voice of the customer listening, that encourages voice of the employee listening, so that when the experience happens, we capture feedback. We use that feedback to improve the design of the experience. That experience gets delivered, and we again continue this loop of feedback. That's where organizations like QuestionPro come into play with technology that enables that kind of a solution. Let me pause here. I'm sure your gears are spinning. Mine certainly are. Do you have any questions or anything else that you'd like to add at this point?
Anyone? You must have a thought.
If not, I'm going to keep rolling. I've got plenty. So we've kind of worked backwards to a certain extent. We've defined quality with a couple of different definitions, and we talked about the importance of customer satisfaction quality being pinnacle among them, about how that level of satisfaction and feedback about it can help to improve internal standards and benchmarking against competitors. But let's say we're starting an experience from scratch. It hasn't ever been delivered before. We want to open a new restaurant or a new hotel, or we want to open a convenience store, a gas station, or a retail shop. What are some of the things you want to think about to begin with? I like to think in terms of a bit of a matrix. On one axis, you've got all of the 5 senses. And then on the other axis, you have the 7 Ps of marketing. And some of you might be taken aback by that and thinking back to school days when they advocated for the 4 Ps, product, place, price, promotion. You're wondering, what are these 3 new Ps? Well, in the services marketing world, we still have product, the product or service being delivered. We still have place, the channels in which it's being communicated. Price, of course, needs to happen if we're going to be charging people for it. And promotion entails the advertising and publicity associated with the offering. But the other 3 Ps are the physical evidence, the material that go along with delivering that experience. In a hotel, it would be like a plastic key card, or the hotel itself is a physical environment. You'd have people, the role of the customer, the role of employees, the role of people behind the scenes that you might not even know exist. And then there's also the process, the customer journey that the individual partakes in to experience that service. And so again, on one axis of experience design, I think it's important to consider what are the senses that the human, the customer, is experiencing, is hearing and feeling and touching and maybe even tasting and smelling as they go through a journey. And then what are the different components of those 7 Ps: product, place, price, promotion, physical evidence, people, and process. And how are your senses integrated across those components as you navigate the customer journey? There are lots of different tools that you can use to design this. Some as straightforward as a customer journey map, others a little bit more complicated along the lines of service blueprints. But it's important to think about each of those components along every step of the customer's journey, so that you can think intentionally about what the customer is going to go through, so that you can think about what steps will an employee need to do on the front line of service to deliver that experience. And so that to the best of your ability, you can either design quality or anticipate risks where there might be unquality experiences, and then plan those problem resolution steps so that they'll have a better chance of kind of kicking in and being effective along the way. This is a framework that that I use with my clients, and it's also a framework that's adapted again from a lot of experience that I had within the Disney organization with Ritz-Carlton, where quality is taken very, very deliberately.
So, Alec, let me ask a question here. Since you've laid out this nice framework here, is that written anywhere? Is that documented anywhere? Or am I kind of prompting you to write a book on this?
I think we've got a book in the works, Carl. It'll feed into a lot of thinking. But what you can do, a lot of this thinking is available on my personal blog. You can go to alecdalton.com and find examples there, some video clips. Incidentally, Carl and I have had some recordings over the years, including a separate podcast that he's hosted, Unsung Heroes of CX, where we spoke a little bit about service quality. So you can certainly tune in there. But again, the core principles here, if you want to break it down, are the 5 senses. You've got the 7 P's of services marketing. You can Google that and you'll find all sorts of different graphics and resources to support it. And when you think about quality and how to balance the investments that we've been talking about in delivering an effective experience, you can Google the cost of quality, and you'll see writings from people like Phil Crosby or Joseph Duran, some of the quality gurus who speak actively or spoke actively in their past lives about how do you create that balancing act between your prevention and appraisal costs and the failure costs that you want to avoid.
So I'm thinking right now, Alec, let me just toss this out here and see where we go with it. There's a lot of chat and talk lately about the service quality when one deals with a contact center.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of technology that has been kind of tossed at that issue and problem. And we just learned recently that Frontier Airlines made a decision to drop their, call center in favor of whatever AI technology, whether it be chatbot or whatever. I just wonder what your thoughts are about that, because I love human contact, but I don't dislike technology. I think if technology can answer a quick question for me, it's great.
Mm-hmm.
But there's always a point that it seems that it's either implemented badly or poorly, and you get to that point where I can't get what I want. Thinking of that success, effort, and emotion index and stuff like that. And so I'm kind of wondering what your thoughts are about that. Do we think this is like the wave of the future? Do we think other organizations, either other airlines or other organizations, can say, hey, that sounds interesting to me. We can pile technology onto this thing here, and we've removed the human aspect of that, which would disappoint me, I think, in a little bit, because I like working with and talking to humans.
Mm-hmm. Right, exactly. Yeah, I think in the most basic sense, any experience, as we all know as CX professionals, follows a journey, and you can map it out, and it's the journey of the customer as the customer interacts with the organization. And technology, in my mind, is a proxy for people. You could have an entirely human-to-human business, or you can have technology that interacts with humans, or you can have some combination of both employees and technology interacting with the customer. To the greatest extent possible, that technology ought to be humane. It should be understandable and presented in words and verbiage and tone of voice that the customer feels acknowledged. It feels, to an extent, ideally personalized, but at the very least, it's coherent and it's intelligible, and it allows the customer to move forward in the process. I think about an organization like Amazon, a company that probably all of us have made a purchase from at some point or another. I've been buying from Amazon for years now. I don't know if I've ever talked to an Amazon employee. Even for refunds and returns, they've made it very easy to use their website or use their app to navigate that process of fulfilling in a self-service manner. It's not actually self-service because they've intentionally designed the technology that at least gives the illusion of self-service, but they've made it pretty easy. There are, though, if you need a very kind of niche form of problem resolution, they do have some off-ramps where you can kind of escalate to a chat bot or have a member of the Amazon team call you. And so what I would say to organizations is, I wouldn't ever discourage self-service in that sense, especially when it comes to problem resolution. There's a tendency for customers in general to want to be able to solve a challenge as soon as it arises, or as quickly at least as possible, to go through as few hurdles as is necessary to create a frictionless or effortless experience to the greatest extent. It's just kind of a human pursuit, and self-service allows that to happen. But there needs to be thought about organizing those self-service channels in ways that make it, again, easy and effortless for the customer. And there should be off-ramps where we don't unintentionally frustrate the customer as they navigate, decision trees on the call center side or large FAQ indexes on websites. There should be some way for the customer to kind of press the eject button and go straight to somebody on the phone. Kind of think zero when you're dialing a call center. um, that ought to be informed by VOC, by other data about the customer journey to pinpoint, where might those pitfalls be, where a customer could get stuck, or where might the business have breakdowns that might occur, where the customer might need to get in contact with us, and how can we make those recovery processes as straightforward as possible.
I'm
There
glad,
are, again, alternatives to human to
I'm,
human.
I'm glad you brought up Amazon, because I actually have spoken with an Amazon agent. I actually had to call
Mm,
them for something, and they were very helpful. I think, though, that's what happens, though. I think you need to make that technology as effective and seamless as possible. And then when you do have that need, when the customer does have that need that I can't solve it this way, I need to talk to a real person, you've not frustrated them so much that when they get to the to a human being, they want to strangle that human being.
right, exactly. And that comes down to empowerment too, which is a core tenet in experience design, especially on the service front. I don't think we have enough time to get too deep into that, but I'll give you a really good example. I won't name the airline, but on the airline front, back in, I think it was May, I had some snafus that involved a canceled flight. And I was trying to get a partial refund for a hotel stay that was promised by the agent on the phone when I made my rebooking. And it took, I think, ultimately 15 different phone calls to various call centers across the organization, sometimes involving multi-hour waits or being passed from one person to the next. I engaged to try and expedite this. I think I sent them a tweet, a direct message on Twitter, a direct message on Facebook. There are lots of different channels. That ultimately cost the organization a ton of money in the time it spent for people all across it to respond to me, when they could have organized themselves in an alternative way that would have either had kind of single points of contact with more latitude or empowerment, or streamlining around what's seemingly a very common issue, um, to reduce those internal costs associated with failure, and along the way to reduce the burden on the customer at the end of the day. And I'll tell you, as a result of that experience, I don't fly with that airline anymore. It was exceptionally cumbersome as a process. And sometimes I think businesses, especially larger organizations, may have a tendency to think they're kind of too big to fail. They're immune to the pressures of customers. But what the aftermath of COVID is starting to prove is that that's not always going to be the case. There are enough competitors, even in oligopic industries, where customers sometimes do have a choice. And if the experiences continue to be inconsistent or consistently poor, customers will in various ways make a flip to competitors, or quality becomes a leading advantage for other companies.
I want to give an opportunity here for the group that's gathered here today, 17 of you, very impressive here, to ask any questions that or make comments of anything that Alec and I have been talking about here today. So feel free to jump right on in, just unmute and jump in.
We've got a lot of gears spinning. I can hear them.
Jerry, you made a comment in the chat here. Do you want to say something to that effect?
Well, I was just following up on something Alex said in response to your question. Most organizations have a VP or director of quality, and they don't get a lot of visitors. So if you want to learn more about quality and how it's practiced in your organization, make friends with them, and they'll be happy to share their expertise.
Exactly. They should be your allies in this.
Absolutely.
As somebody who worked in quality for many years, sometimes quality can be seen as the team at the end of the day with the quality assurance stick, or that imposes some bureaucracy. But quality departments that are doing well and integrated well are there to help to ensure and deliver quality, and they create that feedback loop.
Or they may be the group that's keeping the product from getting out the door. So
Mhm.
they can almost become an adversary in some people's
Right.
minds. But at the end of the day, you're all on the same team.
Exactly. Exactly right.
So I'll make a comment here because I did some work with a client not too long ago, but long enough ago. It was a fairly large company, and the customer experience came under the VP of quality, believe it or not.
Mhm.
And because lots of times, or typically, you'll see if CX is attached to a group or a department in an organization, more than likely you see it pop up under marketing.
Mhm.
And one could make lots of arguments of whether that was a good thing or not a good thing. But it was very interesting to see how that worked under the quality group within a large organization, high-tech organization.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think it was a good placement and it was very effective.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. It's at the end of the day, it's all integrated. Quality is an evaluation in large part of the effectiveness of the customer experience, and there are also those internal business practices, and in some cases, in industries like medicine or like tech, where quality serves other functions from a control standpoint or from an auditing standpoint. But ultimately, the organization will be one that's got synergy between the departments and they support each other in pursuing a goal.
It's funny. I was just actually going to make a comment about that. My career background's been in organizational development, organizational behavior, and the communication between different departments. I was looking at your list here. You think about the different constituents that are involved in the compliance quality.
Mhm.
That's usually a production function. Often, you've
Mhm.
got your customer satisfaction quality, which is going to be often kind of marketing CX, and then you've got your competitive quality, which marketing's always involved in.
Mhm.
Those are very diverse groups of individuals that are going to be working on what's really different components, as you said, of the quality situation, and trying to get them to come together around a shared vision.
Mhm.
Even more than that, a shared. It's not even the vision level. I mean, it's like operational, tactical level around different issues. That's a real challenge. And how do you integrate that in your communication with companies, talking about these different groups and how they need to work together? How do you get that down to the, like I say, like your situation with the airlines,
Mhm.
where that's really involving a whole bunch of different groups that failed?
Right, exactly. One of the principles in quality management, oftentimes, especially in organizations with a quality department, is that quality is everybody's job, and that's a
Mhm.
cliche for a lot of different departments: sales,
Yep.
customer experience. We all hear
Yeah.
that, but at the end of the day, it's true. And what I think needs to happen in organizations, I very firmly believe that quality is one of those areas where silos need to be broken down and cross-functional teams need to be formed. And so, from a quality perspective, what I often recommend within organizations is that they look into their VOC and identify, or their VOE, and look into where are their common pain points, especially ones that are proving costly to the organization, where they're leaking customers, where they're issuing an exorbitant amount of refunds, where they're producing an amount of rework or producing waste that's untenable, and forming committees to study those. There should be representation of any employees that are producing it on the front lines and some members of their management structure. There should be a member of the quality team who can kind of shepherd the process. Customer experience should be involved. Each situation will have certain participants who ought to have a seat at that table and be part of an organization that again both studies it and identifies root causes and then goes about finding course corrective ways to fix it. But it is about having an integrated conversation. And so when I'm engaging with clients that are pursuing quality improvement, that's one of my most immediate recommendations. Is once we figure out what challenge we want to tackle, it's then figuring out who needs to have a seat at that table and how do we organize the conversations to move the organization forward in tandem.
Do they tend to be these? Do they tend to be one-off event related, or are they ongoing this cross-functional team meets like every Thursday to go through all the worst of the worst situations and try to figure out strategy from it, or operational changes?
Great question. I would say yes to both. There should be event-driven quality teams that, so let's say a particular issue arises, like we'll use that example from the airline, like customers calling in because they were expecting a refund off of other travel related expenses due to a trip cancellation. If that's a recurring problem, there should be a task force that stood up to, again, do the research, figure out why is this happening, how do we abate the challenges in the customer experience, how do we design business processes that are integrated across the organization, make it as easy as and effortless as possible for the customer, and as profitable at least, or less costly to the business.
Mhm.
There should also be some cadence of standing meetings to study issues in general and figure out, are there ongoing challenges? So to paint a picture from the Ritz-Carlton, this happens in every hotel at least every week around the world. The organization will have the leaders of all the operations departments, often with even the head of human resources, sales, marketing, engineering, the general manager of the hotel, etc. They'll sit down in conference and they will look at every problem that happened over the course of the past week. And they will, over time, study trends in those types of problems and identify, are there recurring issues? And then for those recurring issues, how do they construct the task forces to tackle those and resolve them so that systematically future guests don't run into the same challenges? Ultimately, these task forces are really just a form of appraisal and prevention when we think
And
about
they
the quality buckets
and
from earlier.
they obviously have the clout somehow to get things done also.
Mhm. Exactly. You need that endorsement or sponsorship from leaders in the organization. And so that's another key component, having that an organization that champions quality improvement.
Yeah. Alec, that sounds like, governing councils. We talk about that in strategies and stuff like that, but organizations have found success in putting governing councils around CX and CX issues to look at those systemic and long-term problems and keep an eye to those things, because you can always respond to and have to respond to immediate issues, but there's that kind of systemic issue that's going to bite you again and again. So you can
Exactly.
repeating the fix for individual customers and clients over and over again. You don't want to keep doing that.
Exactly. And I hear often from colleagues in customer experience about the challenge calculating the value of CX or the ROI of CX. And quality very conveniently provides a ton of frameworks for doing this, down to the dollar sign. And so I'm seeing here comments from Joshua and Andy asking for different metrics or ways to measure investments. And the cost of quality framework isn't it's one that's pretty well established in the quality world. There are a variety that you could download online by searching cost of quality, where you can actually take these different factors that we've been describing in this conversation and mathematically calculate some of these different factors and functions. You can produce the cost associated with delivering a poor experience, and that can make a really compelling business case to the financial executives in the organization on why improvements ought to be explored and made. At the end of the day, too, it might prove that sometimes, like Carl said earlier, you can live with a degree of imperfection, and so it can help to make those trade-off decisions about where do we put which baskets do we put our eggs in, to a certain extent. There are certain CX metrics that I would argue are more important or relevant than others. I don't think we need to necessarily go into debate right now about measuring CSAT versus customer effort versus net promoter score, things like that. Those are all useful benchmarks in different ways. But at the end of the day, it is useful to look at customer satisfaction, particularly to look at customers reporting problems and to figure out what the correlation is, if any, between the problems that customers are reporting in abundance and overall satisfaction scores, however those might be calculated. And that calculation, that correlation, can again be really useful in figuring out which are the areas that we tackle first to improve the quality of the organization.
Thanks, Alex. This has been a really exciting and engaging discussion here today. I think we could probably go on for another half hour, but in respect for people's time and the fact that we had a 45-minute time slot here, I think we should wind things up. I do want to say that episode 2, I'm going to go out on a limb here. I think we're all set with that. On January 17th, which is believe it's a Tuesday. Yep, it's a Tuesday at 11 a.m. Central Time, or better known as 12 p.m. Eastern Time. And you can figure out the other time zones wherever you are. And our guest on that day will be none other than somebody who's on camera right now, Mr. Jerry Seifert. And he was going to give us an engineer's perspective on CX. You want to say just a couple of words before we close out, Jerry, on that? Kind of whet people's appetite?
Sure. My education was as an engineer. I actually came to the CX community only in the last 5 years, after a long career of doing various things and a lot of delivery and customer service. And one of the things that I began to notice and pay attention to is some of the assets I came to the CX community because of my engineering background. For example, the relentless study of failure that engineers do automatically. So I've begun to bring some of these techniques a little more to the fore in my CX advisory work and in my work with coachees and small groups with success. So I just wanted to take a few minutes to share what my experiences have been as an engineer working in customer experience. And Karl graciously invited me, and he's also a scientist by training. So
the word is out now.
so you're going to get an engineer. It's like the beginning of a joke, right? An engineer and a scientist host a podcast or something like that.
Walk into a bar, or
walk into a bar and share what they've learned. So thank you, Karl. Looking forward.
Oh, you're welcome, and looking forward to that. Don't mark your calendars, January 17th. I'm sure we'll have some messages going out here. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Paulina, for hosting this thing here on Zoom. And wish everybody a great and happy holiday, since we will not be together until, and hopefully most of you have enjoyed what you've heard here today, and we'll come back.